Well, welcome back to our continuing journey on podcast with Fishing Without Bait, a lifetime without definitive expectations, where we're helping people explode into their lives and creating a life that they want. And in a complete turnaround, we're going to continue our conversation with Missy Sorg, who has me interviewing yours truly, Jim Ellermeyer, your friendly neighborhood behavioral health therapist.
How did your relationship with alcohol and that entire situation, and I'm presuming that it put a strain on your relationships, including that with your mother. Obviously, you told us the story of her having you committed as a result of it. How did she react when you told her that you were going to finally seek help and that you had kind of acknowledged that you needed to put all that beyond you?
Well, the moment of clarity came. It was a long time ago, and I remember I was sitting in my house, and I was drinking vodka, and my wife, who we're today amicably parted, had taken the children, they were young back then, out of the house because they just she didn't want to see it. And I thought, well, that's okay, because I really like to drink alone, that's one of the commonalities among people with substance abuse is at the end of their using, I'll call it using, they isolate and they would prefer to drink alone. And when I say the end of somebody's using, that's not a few days. The end can last years. So I remember sitting there that night, and I've spoken about this before, but it's a commonality usually among people in addiction that you begin to feel fear. And it's an unfounded, unknown, unlabeled fear that you cannot identify. All I know is that I was terrified. I was sweating. And I had that fear, and I had no foundational basis for it. So I had no concept of this higher power stuff. I'd been to some 12-step meetings before. I was raised Catholic. And at one time I taught CCD. I knew all the facts, okay? I knew the letter of the law. I didn't know the spirit of it. All right. So I called a friend of mine who was the best man in my wedding, and facetiously I say in my leads that I've forgiven him for that since. But I told him, I said, Stuart, I said, I'm horribly terrified. I don't know if I'm terrified of living. I don't know if I'm afraid I'm dying. I don't know afraid of using. I don't know what I'm afraid of. And I said, I don't have any connection with any higher power, anything at all. I said, would you pray for me? And he said, I certainly will. Well, that night that I received that message, it was when I talk to people about an addiction, I ask them, is there a time in their addiction when there were no more tears left? Because anybody in addiction would understand and tell you that it's a tortured life. It's the hardest full-time life anybody will probably have. It's fear, regret, fear of being found out, fear, the responsibility, the guilt and the shame, the manipulation, the deception, the lying that you have to do to get what you need. And I often suggest to people that addiction's stronger than love, and it's stronger than gravity. You can love someone and just the same bypass that love around to go back to your drug of choice. So I was that way that night. And most people in addiction, one of the commonalities is disturbed sleep patterns. You haven't slept well in years. And I think if you talk to any of your family, friends, or anybody that you know has been in addiction, they'll tell you the same thing. So I was tossing and turning, and at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I remember specifically to get out of bed. And I went and I got out of bed and I laid on the floor. And again, there were no tears left. And I probably said the most sincere prayer that I've ever said in my life. I said, I'm done. Please help me. Not that I was done using. I was done. I was physically, emotionally, spiritually spent. I was done. And if I would have been taken then out, I think I'd have been okay with it. But that night I received that help. And I don't care what anybody thinks because I was there. And I never used or drank again. However, when I woke up that morning, I thought to myself, I have got to go see my mother. And when I would go see her, it would make me feel bad, not because she would scream or yell at me. It was my behavior that I knew that she was so disappointed in. So uh, people with addictive mindset think a little differently. A normal person would stop or moderate, but my solution was to stop seeing her. That was the easiest solution. Well, you got pain? Well, don't be around the thing that makes you allergic. So I didn't see my mother for 2 years, which, looking back on this, is really pathetic. So I decided I needed to go talk to her. So I drove over there in the morning and I walked into her kitchen. And remember, I hadn't been there in 2 years. My brother would call me occasionally to make sure that I was alive. But at that time, I don't know if he cared. He did it so at the urging of my mother. And I walked into her kitchen and she came out and she says, "Jimmy, what are you doing here?" And I says, "Mom, I've got something to tell you." And she says, "Oh no, what now?" Because who knows what it would have been. So I asked her to sit down at the table, and that old woman came and sat at that table. And you know what? I held her hand and I said, "Mom," I said, not going to promise you anything. And I often ask people, don't promise anybody anything. I said, I'm going to try. I said, I'm going to try to step away from this life, and I'm going to return to the 12-step world. And that woman, this is, we talk about moments that crystallize in your mind, and memories are generally formed by strong emotions. So I sat there at that table, and that woman just laid her head on that table, and she cried and cried and cried. And she raised her hands up and she said, "Thank you, God, how I've prayed for this day." And it wasn't until that moment that I realized what I'd done to her. Remember, one of the commonalities of addiction is selfishness and self-centeredness. I thought if I was hurting anybody, I was only hurting me. It wasn't anybody else's business. But when I sat back and looked at the pain and perhaps joy, all these myriad of emotions that she was feeling, I sat back in that table and I thought, my God, what have I done to her? What have I done? What have I done to my life? What have I done to my children? What have I done to my wife? What have I done to my life? And those thoughts and feelings can be overwhelming. Missy, there's a thought in the 12-step world that when you start using addictively, you stop growing emotionally. So I'm sitting there, a grown man, at with the probably the emotional maturity of a 10-year-old. Okay, so I didn't seek help. And for those of you out there, these thoughts and feelings don't come out dripping out of the faucet. They're like a geyser. They explode and they can be overwhelming and they can drown you. And they drowned me. And that night, when I tried to go to sleep, I had a psychic break. I don't care if anybody believes me. I remember specifically that believed I was sitting on top of this mountain and it was pitch dark. There was lightning going around and my dead relatives were calling me to join them. And the last thing I remember was screaming. The next thing that I remembered I'm still not too super glued to reality. Nobody wants to be that glued. But I remember I was sitting on this bed. Imagine this in another psychiatric hospital. And there was a psychiatrist. Her name was Dr. Marianne Galonsky. And she was sitting beside me and she had her hand on my shoulder. And she says, "Jim, I'm going to help you." And she did. So I got into the back into AA. I remember going out to, I was in Katanning where I was raised. I was there until I was 18, 19 years old. And the doctor, Dr. Lewis Hauber, was there. And I looked down and I says, "Well, Dr. Hauber," I said, "when can I go back to work?" And he put his arm around me. Wonderful people. And he said, "Jimmy, do you like to go fishing?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he says, "It's time to go fishing, buddy." So I was on Social Security disability for the next 8 years, which allowed me to participate in 12-step recovery. Nothing happens, everything happens for a reason. If I wouldn't have had that time to devote to that and being influenced by wonderful human beings like Sam Heckel, who was the greatest influence in my life. I love him more than anything in the world. I think if there's an eternity, I want to spend the first few million years with him. And he died about 6 years ago, and I miss him every day of my life. But I'm happy. He died clean and sober, and he died peacefully, just like my sponsor did. So, and my mother was but she hated alcohol so badly. I specifically remember that when I was released from the Katanning Hospital, and then I had to go into these partial hospitalizations where you're babysat for 6 hours a day, she took, when I walked into her house and she said, "Stay here." She walked in and she liked to drink wine occasionally. She took every bottle of alcohol that she had in that house, took it out into the yard. Not only she emptied them out, she took a hammer and she smashed those bottles to smithereens and swept it all up and put it in a garbage can. That's how much she despised alcohol. So, is there anything that I could have done in my life? Could I have bought her any diamond rings? Could I have bought her fur coats? Could I have taken her for trips around the world and said, "Mom, now we're even"? That's impossible. The only thing that we can do, Missy, is like what we do is we practice living amends. That's continuing to do the next right thing, continuing to know the difference between right and wrong, continuing to have a moral compass, continuing to be dependable, continuing to be honest, and continuing to treat people with courtesy and respect. And that was the greatest tribute I could give to my mother. And when she did pass, I uh, I was with her. She was obviously on hospice. She was about 86, and her life was just worn out. So I sat with her the whole day and singing and talking to her, and I had to leave for a few minutes, and she passed. Then my son called me and said she's gone, and I know that she waited. She waited until I was out of the room before she passed. And in the 12-step world, what we do is we give bronze coins. We give coins as recognitions of periods of sobriety, okay? And usually the first coin that you get, your number one's the most special one. So I put it in her casket and buried it with her.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, yes. There's a line in the book, big book, that says that the patience of wives and mothers patheth all understanding. And isn't that the truth?
As a wife, I will agree with that.
Yes. So what we're talking about here is a series of life-changing events. Okay, people talk about these magical experiences. Like Bill Wilson spent 3 times in Charles Towns Hospital in New York City detoxing. Okay, he had this magical experience, this special effects type of encounter with the divine. Okay, and he never drank or used again. And when he saw Dr. Silkworth the next day, who was a medical director, he said, "Dr. Silkworth, am I crazy?" He said, "Anything's better than the way you were." So he wrote about that incident in the big book. The 164 pages is the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's a foreword, there's a doctor's opinion, and then there's Bill's story, which was the first story. Bill was a bit of a egomaniac, but he talked about that. So people were writing in to after the book was published, saying that, "Hey, Bill, I'm not hearing trumpets. I'm not seeing the light. There's no angels here. Am I going to be able to recover?" So they realized that Bill had probably given expectations of people, okay, unrealistic expectations. So in the back of the book, in Appendix 2, was written the spiritual experience, was explained that most spiritual experiences are of an educational variety. We grow into it. It's just like in therapy. We ease into recovery. The rewards are incremental. And we have to be patient and understand that things might get a little worse before they get better. because you're digesting large chunks of truth about yourself. But the beautiful thing about it is you're in with like-minded people who don't ask you why you were there or why you did the things that you did. The only thing they care about is what you want to do about it. That's what I generally tell people, Missy. I say, I don't care what you've done. What I care is what you want to do about it. And what we want to do in life, we want to get out of the problem and into the solution. So my mother did not keep grinding over echoes of the past, strolling down memory lane until it was a 15-foot funnel, okay? What she talked about was the solution. What are we going to do? How are we going to maintain recovery? What are we going to do about this? Providing encouragement and support, okay? You know, if every day somebody would say to me, don't drink today, don't drink today, don't drink today, you know what I'd have done?
You had gone drinking.
I'd have gone to drug today. I remember specifically when I was in the partial hospitalization, there was I went to an IOP, intensive outpatient program at night, and I was in with a group of my brothers and sisters. And I remember a psychiatrist coming in there one night, and the facilitator of it was building me up, so proud of me. Jim's the only one in the group that hasn't relapsed. It had been 6 weeks. Jim's the only one that hasn't relapsed in the group. I thought, well, I don't want to be the odd man out. So what did I do? Of course I relapsed. Of course I did. Remember, recovery's a journey. It just doesn't happen. And it just doesn't happen. You know, like we say in the 12-step world, we don't shoot our wounded. Okay? And like I say on this show, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness to try. Those are the 3 essentials to recover from anything. And that's all we have to have is a few pixie dust sprinkles of those and you're on your way. We do not shoot our wounded. Absolutely not. Well, we're going to continue our conversation with Missy Sorg as she quizzes me about my life and views on life, which is definitely a turnaround from what we usually do. And I'll be looking forward to seeing you all on the next podcast. And I don't want to miss out on this. I don't want to disappoint anyone. The free prescription, fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Unplug your television and take up fishing. And for a truly mindful experience, we suggest you fish without bait. Do a kindness for yourself and do a kindness for another. Forgive yourself and forgive another. Till all are free, none are free. All of us are God's children. See you soon. Namaste.
Please check out our website at fishingwithoutbait.com, where you can listen to the show, comment on our discussions, and find out where you can subscribe to our podcast. If you're interested in flying the colors of Fishing Without Bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait. This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at Sorgatron.